I've worked with him for about, I'm going to say 6 years per se.
Wow.
Okay. Now, he doesn't outright not believe in God. Okay. He has his questions and whatnot, but he doesn't outright believe. Well, I finally got him to come to church with me before he went on vacation. And I was so excited about that. I was so excited that I wasn't supposed to go to church that Sunday because I had to work Sunday night. But I went to church anyway because he was going.
You did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, or when, you know, one of my roommates, I actually hated this guy. When I tell you hated him, I hated him with a royal passion, if you will. But to find out that he at one point believed in God, but kind of walked away due to some other things. We're now roommates together, obviously, and we have these discussions all the time. I get excited when we have these discussions because we're either learning more about God, or he's learning what I know and what I'm able to teach him, and then I'm learning what he knows and he's able to teach me. That in and of itself, even though it's behind closed doors in our own home, that is also the Great Commission.
No doubt. No doubt.
And I think that's God's mission for us too as humans. You know, this is my quote, and I'm sticking to it. And I've been saying it for a while. No one has ever been called to walk alone in his or her own faith. We walk together.
Yes.
And that in and of itself stitches the Great Commission into God's ultimate plan for us as humans to the world that's lost.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, I think Jim Wallace was the one who had said that Christianity is personal, but it's never private.
Right.
You know? That's the way he described it too, right? Like, I've got to give an account to Jesus. Who do I say that he is? But once that happens, it says we are incorporated into a body, into a temple, into a family. It's all relational type language, and that it's true. You know, my pastor just last week was preaching on something related to this, and he was talking about the family of God in such a way that he was saying, here's the reality of what the Bible paints for us in terms of our identity in Christ, is that it is so central to who we are that our unbelieving neighbor who lives in the same community, speaks the same language, grows up with the same exact values, has less in common with us than a brother or sister in a distant land that I maybe have never seen before, some tribe in Africa, in Sierra Leone where we were. Those are my brothers and sisters in a way that my unbelieving neighbor is not. And when I connect with them, like we go overseas, we're in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Vietnam. It is amazing the kind of kinship that we have in relationship with people who share the same exact spirit of God living inside of them that's inside of me. It's unbelievable. And so I think that is something, that is the Missio Dei, that God would continue to pour his own spirit into the very bodies of believers and would knit us together into one family. Like Jesus says, he says, for my believers, I want them to experience the same kind of unity, the same kind of intimacy I experienced with the Father. I now have invited you to participate in. That'll blow your mind. That'll blow your mind.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. You know, and it's crazy how, well, I think it's crazy. God allowed Adam and Eve to live as long as they did, even though they sinned.
Yes.
You know, but from the beginning of time, and I had a discussion with one of my friends. He likes to stay anonymous, but he's been questioning a few things, and he sent me a question about Satan. And, you know, one of the questions was, if God created Satan, then God must have known that Satan was going to rebel against him. And the answer is yes, he did. But at the same time, he loves us enough that when he set out on his great commission to love us and to extend himself to us and pour himself out on us, then we in return, we have the great commission as a gift for us in order to go to those who are lost.
Yeah. Are we talking about Matt Everhart? Because he's asked me that question before too.
We're not talking about Matt Everhart.
I'm just kidding.
Hey, leave Matt alone. Matt's my buddy. All right. So the next question is, and I'm going to try to pronounce this Latin word, and if I mess it up, you are to correct me. All right. What is the Missio Ecclesia?
So that is just a fancy way of saying the mission of the church. And so we, you know, what I'm arguing for in using that kind of terminology is to say, first and foremost, those two things should be the same. And oftentimes what we find is that the mission of the church, when we think of the missio ecclesia, oftentimes we think of a group of leaders getting together and discerning for themselves the mission and vision of that particular local church. Apart from the larger calling and the very purpose of why God called it into existence, but trying to suggest, okay, we as a church, we exist for, and I'm not against vision statements. I'm not against missions. I think it's great to have clarity about why you exist in the local setting that you do. But the reality is that like, that's not anything that we need to make up. That's not anything that we need to be creative about, right? The church exists in all times and all places for the same exact reason. And God has given it in the Missio Dei, in the mission of God. We are participating in that. That's what we're doing. So if you need words to clarify it, that's fine. But the reality is like, it's not up to us. We don't get to decide in each time, in each place, why it is that this church exists. We already know why it exists. And so I think that's the clarifier for it, is to see that we use these terms sometimes, and obviously not in Latin always, but we'll use that kind of language. And you go on a church website and you'll look up the mission of that church. You look up the vision of that church. And again, I think sometimes those can be helpful or clarifying statements. But when that begins to seep down into the places and where we're saying we're not evaluating any longer about where our dollars are being spent, where our time's being spent, how we're adjusting our programs in light of that mission statement, rather than the mission statement that God himself has given us. Go therefore and make disciples of all the earth. Amen. That's what we're doing. That's what we're all called to do. So in light of that, let's think about how we exist as a church. Let that be our driving mission statement, and not need to be so creative about it sometimes.
Yeah, if I was a pastor of a church, my session would hate me and my church would hate me, because my mission statement would literally be preach the gospel. And my vision statement would be preach the gospel.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Right. I mean, and it's those kinds of things that on the outside can appear to be like, almost like a joke or something like that, because of how far we have moved into this realm of functioning like a business or an organization, and less as an organism, less as an extension of God himself, man-made institutions, Yeah. And I think that's trouble with it. So that's a different conversation for a different time.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, Stephen, you put in your article, I think it was Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 12, I believe. I think I'm wrong. Hold on.
Should be right on that too. I don't have the article in front of me.
I have my beautiful journal in front of me. I'm going to go take a look at it real quick.
Go ahead. I mean, one thing I do talk about in there, obviously, because it is the Westminster, and I think it's fair to say, and it's important that Reformed theology and reformers, those in the Reformed tradition, have gotten a bad rap when it comes to missions oftentimes. And if you were a person who is serious about the Westminster Confession, you'll see right away that there is no mention of evangelism. There's no mention of missionaries or missions. Those words don't appear in it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of the struggle sometimes, is to help people articulate the fact that, like, the clarification of the gospel, just what you just said, right? So even as you say, the mission of the church, preach the gospel, the vision of the church, preach the gospel, the reality is that what the reformers have given us is a gospel, the pure gospel to preach again. That's what they were reforming. There was no missions happening in the truest sense. It was happening in the sense of when Jesus says in the gospel that for some of your followers, you've made them twice the sons and daughters of hell, because it was a false gospel. And we see that all over the world. And so it's not a statement about how to do ministry. It's not necessarily a practical tool in all senses of that words on how to run a church. That's not what the Westminster Confession does, but it clarifies and brings back to the fold again what the gospel is. And that, in that sense, it is one of the greatest impetuses for missions, because in it we see the clarity of who God is in his attributes. We see his heart for the world. We have a clarification of what sanctification is, justification is, adoption is. And because of that, here's the response, that now we have something of value to share with the world, something of clarity, something with power to go share with the world. That sort of the essence of what I was talking about in there is you're right. We've got the frozen chosen idea out there that folks have thought, like, and I honestly, I have been in places where that has been absolutely true. Like, we've earned We've earned that reputation, and that is a stereotype for a reason. That I do think there are places in which people have misapplied the concept of the elect to the extent that it literally means I don't have to do anything.
Right.
I don't have to do anything. And so, and that was even some of the early attempts at missions. That was the pushback from some folks in the Reformed tradition, that if God wants to save the heathen, he can do it on his own. He doesn't need me. I mean, that's sort of be the stand. And that's not the point. We're not talking about whether he could or not. The reality is this is the way he's chosen to do it, that no person would come to be saved in Jesus Christ without the preaching of the gospel.
Right.
He could have designed it a different way, but that is the way he designed it. And so elect or not elect, whether you are reformed or unreformed, God has clearly told us in his Bible, this is the means by which someone must be saved. It's by hearing and receiving the gospel.
Again,
so we got to go do it. Yeah, we got to go do it.
No one has ever been called to walk alone in his or her own faith.
Yes.
We have to have the gospel preached to us, yet we have to also preach the gospel.
Yes, and that's exactly it.
One of the things that I love about the EPC, and I am not bashing any other denomination, I'm speaking because I am part of the EPC,
right?
Is we have a passion for missions.
Yes.
And I love it. I want the EPC to have the evangelistic zeal of George Whitefield.
Yep.
I want the EPC to, in a sense, be like, who's Matthew's favorite person? He's always
Jonathan Edwards.
Exactly. That's who the EPC, in my eyes, I kind of see it happening. Is we need to be like those people. We need to want to get the gospel out. I mean, goodness sake, look what Billy Graham did. Over his years of just preaching the gospel.
Just being faithful.
And being faithful. Yes, we get worn out. Yes, we get tired. Yes, we get aggravated and agitated, and we don't want to do it. And we don't want to be in prayer about it. We just want to walk away from it. But this is how Jesus Christ commissioned his church. And the Great Commission, yes, can be tiresome, but we cannot fall asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Yeah, preach it.
This is not one of those things where we say, Jesus, take the wheel. No, Jesus gave us the wheel. So now we have to go forward with it.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's the truth, man. That's great. I love it. And and to recognize too that even in that same breath, he hasn't just given the wheel to those that are standing on that stage and being sent overseas. I think that often is one of my greater fears, especially raising my own 3 boys, and they see me doing this work, and we're doing it in a unique kind of way. Like the first question we usually get from folks is, where are you serving? We say, well, actually it's 10 different countries. And the way that we're doing this in this day and age, technology is an unbelievable tool. And I think more people than ever can be involved directly with missions in a way that they couldn't before. Our denomination, EPC, just last week, I just got back from a youth mission trip to Dearborn, Michigan. So Dearborn and Hamtramck, some of the largest populations of Muslims in our entire country, and they're here. And you get off the plane outside of Detroit, you walk downtown Dearborn, you'll see women in full burqas, you'll see men in robes and turbans. I mean, it looks just like it does in other places where I've been overseas, in Muslim regions of India or in Pakistan. They're fully fluent in their home languages. The stores are packed with Arabic food and people speaking Arabic, and it's here. It's right here. You literally just have to go to Michigan or even closer to where I am. I'm sure in New Orleans there's that, and there's Atlanta, there's New York City, there's Los Angeles, right here in the States without ever leaving. You have got people that are now being brought right to your very doorstep that are in a much more receptive position to hear the gospel here in this place. As a vulnerable person that does not know the language, does not know the customs, is going to have a difficult time finding a job, getting a license. There's so many tangible ways to reach out to those communities that are coming here, that it's made missions all the more accessible to our churches and to every person in the pew. It's pretty exciting times.
Wow, that's awesome. I love it when a couple episodes, actually in season 1, I had a friend that she's Baptist, okay, and she was going on a mission trip, I think, to Uganda, and she sent me a message on Facebook asking if I would support her financially or whatever. Well, obviously I'm a cop. I don't make that kind of money to